This is the morning of the 7th of December. Clip put up by AM Beyond Military, titled Coast Guard Strikes the Cartel Speedboat Hard. Then this happens. Have a listen. This will play for around 15 minutes.
At 10 local time, U.S. forces were locked onto cartel runners who had just made the worst decision of their lives somewhere in the eastern Pacific. Their boat tore across the surface at 50 knots. A typical fishing craft? Maybe 12. Whoever these men were, they weren't after marlin. They were escaping, blissfully unaware they'd been tracked for the last 2 hours. Inside the Ghost, the crew moved with the practiced rhythm of veterans. This route? They'd pushed it 18 times before. Same waters, same covert channels, same pockets quietly greased. The helmsman flicked his gaze between the choppy swells and the GPS. On schedule. On course. Under the blue tarps sat product worth $42 million on the street, divided 5 ways after the cartel's slice. Just about $2 million per man, more than enough for anyone to vanish permanently. The Fort Mercury outboards shrieked at full throttle, gliding barely 140 meters off the coastline. Nothing in sight but endless blue and the illusion of freedom. But overhead, at 25,000 feet, an HC-130J Super Hercules had been orbiting since 0600. Its AN/APS-154 advanced radar scanned a 200-mile bubble sorting through hundreds of returns. This vessel flagged suspicious at 0800. Speed unmatched to hull shape, a course far from normal traffic, and no AIS signature. 3 immediate warnings. The sensor operator switched to the Star Sapphire 380 HDC electro-optical turret, locking on from 140 miles away. Through its stabilized zoom, he spotted the 4 engines, the tarps, and the restless men on deck. Then at 0945, the pattern shifted. The Ghost ditched its zigzag evasions and bolted into a straight northern sprint. Confidence? Saving fuel? Either way, a fatal error. The tactical coordinator keyed the encrypted sat phone. Kimball, this is Eyes 1. Target holding 50 knots. Recommend deploying interdiction assets. Data pulse through Link 16 into the Kimball's Combat Information Center, then onward to Joint Interagency Task Force South and the DEA analyst mapping cartel networks. The Kimball sat nearly 200 miles distant, limited to 28 knots, far too slow to chase. But it didn't matter. The calculations were already clear. At this fuel consumption, the Ghost would dry out in 4 hours, more than enough time for the cutter to launch its helicopter, overtake the runners, and secure the target zone, while the Kimball closed the gap. By then, the Ghost held a firm north-northeast heading at 50 knots, aiming for a mothership or coastal link-up it would never live to reach. Standard cartel playbook. Push top speed in broad daylight, when the human eye catches motion quickest, and small radar returns disappear inside civilian maritime traffic. But these runners had already sealed their fate. They were operating deep inside the range of a unit created for one mission: stopping anyone who refuses to yield to an airborne law enforcement platform. Putting a round into an engine block from the sky should be nearly impossible. Hitron had succeeded over 500 times. This day was shaping up to be number 501. At 1100, the MH-65E lifted clean off Kimball's flight deck. Twin turbo-mecha engines, each throwing out 853 shaft horsepower. Not the typical search and rescue Dolphin the public imagines. This bird was tuned for one kind of pursuit. The pilot banked hard toward the intercept point, climbing to 3,000 feet where fuel consumption stabilized. 20 minutes later, the co-pilot spotted the target. A bright rooster tail carving half a mile behind a hull, ripping across open water on 4 screaming outboards. From 3 miles away, it looked like someone etched a white chalk streak over the ocean. Below, the smugglers kept running their counter-tracking routine. Zigzags, sudden heading shifts, textbook execution. Their role: change course every 3 to 5 minutes, never hold a straight line long enough for anyone to solve the intercept. Against surface craft, that tactic works. A pursuing cutter would waste fuel recalculating, turning, and chasing. But the helicopter fought in all 3 axes. While the runner slipped left and right, the MH-65E simply drew straight lines between projected turns, shaving off every angle the boat was forced to take. Inside that hull, the crew was almost certainly running their own math. 4 Mercury 300s burned close to 25 gallons an hour each at max throttle. Fuel capacity around 400 gallons. 2 hours at full sprint meant half gone. At this pace, they had maybe 2 hours left, likely less given their payload. Their rendezvous was still 3 hours out. Either someone miscalculated or that opening burst chewed far more fuel than expected. Regardless, physics had turned on them. In the helo, things looked very different. 4 hours endurance, fuel waiting on Kimball. This wasn't a pursuit anymore. It was an ending slowly closing in. The pilot could afford patience. The smugglers could not. Dropping to 500 feet, the MH-65E slid into position off the runner's turn, holding a 500-meter offset, beyond small arms effectiveness, perfectly placed for what came next. Matching the craft's velocity, the pilot kicked off the compliance phase, exactly as Coast Guard doctrine required. Now the machines would speak. The co-pilot fired up the LARAD, the long-range acoustic projector, capable of punching out commands at 162 dB, louder than a rocket lifting off. English and Spanish warnings thundered across the water. Stop your vessel. Prepare to be boarded. This is the United States Coast Guard.
All right, this feels almost illegal to know, but our wind...
Ad just popped up.
Rotor wash turned the sea into a man-made storm, spray detonating in every direction. The smugglers didn't lift off the throttle. Their equation was brutal but straightforward. 5 men, 2,800 pounds of cargo, street value near $42 million, and the shadow of 2 decades in federal prison. Running was the only option left. Maybe they could hit shallows, maybe reach a friendly coastline, maybe anything that wasn't surrender. They rolled the dice, unaware the helicopter overhead had ended this exact scenario hundreds of times. 15 minutes of orders, flares, sirens, and hand signals produced zero cooperation. The pilot keyed up the Kimball, requesting permission for warning fire. Approval came back instantly. The protocols for vessels refusing to stop in international waters weren't just firm, they were absolute. The gunner locked in. The M240B bolted to the helicopter's flank, waited like a restrained predator. A weapon capable of throwing 650 rounds of American persuasion every minute. The first burst tore a bright path across sky and sea, tracers skimming water into spray. The metallic roar of the M240B, that hard, unforgiving thunder every combat veteran recognizes, rolled across the ocean. Most smugglers quit right there. Not these ones. Either desperate or reckless, they chose the hard path. Throttle buried. 4 Mercury outboards screamed at max RPM, props grabbing air as the hull skipped through frantic dodges. The Ghost juked left, right, left again, a move that might throw off a jet. Against a helicopter able to pivot faster than any boat could hope to turn, useless. 3 more warning bursts made the reality clear. These runners were committed. The pilot called it up. Targets remain non-compliant. Authorization followed immediately. The gunner switched roles and weapons. From the M240B's suppressive thunder to a tool built for precision. The Barrett M107, .5 BMG. Not just a different gun, an entirely different message. From stop your vessel to your engines are finished. The shooter was Hitron, Helicopter Interdiction Tactical Squadron, out of Jacksonville. The only airborne law enforcement unit on the planet cleared for what's known as airborne use of force. Hitron crews are the apex predators of maritime interdiction. Since 1998, they've dropped more than 500 runner boats and stripped $6.7 billion from cartel routes. These aren't ordinary Coast Guard air crews. They're trained to disable engines on fleeing craft from a moving helicopter in the most violent environment on Earth. Selection starts with the top 1% of Coast Guard marksmen and tightens from there. Months at MSRT ranges firing from moving platforms in Sea State 4, 6-foot waves, 20-knot winds. They learn to read swell patterns, time troughs, match their breathing to the aircraft's rhythm. One training cycle burns through 5,000 rounds per gunner. The physics are punishing. The helicopter moves at 50 knots in pitch, roll, and yaw. The target runs 50 knots along its own vector. Swell adds vertical chaos to both. Wind shoves rounds. Vibration disrupts optics. Salt spray blinds everything. Most snipers fire from solid earth at unmoving targets. Hitron does the reverse. Why the engines? Sinking a target destroys evidence and creates new hazards. But a powerless hull becomes a floating crime scene, intact, recoverable, controlled. Outboards are the softest points, aluminum hearts packed with fragile parts that turn into confetti when struck by an anti-material slug. The Barrick M107 weighs 30 pounds. Each .5 BMG round is 42 grams of fury, leaving the muzzle at 853 meters per second with more than 11,000 foot-pounds of energy. Enough punch to cut through an inch of steel at half a kilometer. Against aluminum motors, it's brutality squared. Their aiming setup is an EOTech 553 hollow sight paired with an ANPEQ-2 IR laser. The reticle hangs at infinity, letting the shooter track with both eyes open. But at this range, in this chaos, gear is just support. The real weapon is the gunner. Hundreds of missions, thousands of trigger pulls, an instinct tuned to cancel out helo sway, target drift.
My energy bill dropped from $150 to $50. My friends laughed.
Them all at once. The first 50 cal shot hammered the starboard outer engine's power head. That 300 horse Mercury didn't just quit, it detonated. Shrapnel, oil, and smoke erupted as the motor tore itself apart. The boat's speed fell from 50 to 38 knots instantly. The smugglers probably prayed the other 3 engines would keep them alive. That illusion died with shot number 2. The port outer engine took the hit mid-body, fuel lines cut, water pump shredded. It locked up almost immediately. Speed sagged to 25 knots. The Go-Fast began dipping into the swells, its sharp handling bleeding away. The third round was nearly artistic. The gunner found a groove where helo drift, target vector, wind, and trigger pull fused into one motion. The shot blew through the starboard inner engine's lower unit, exited the powerhead, and yanked half the motor's guts with it. Now the boat limped at 12 knots, one engine pushing a hull designed for 4. The fourth round ended the argument. That last Mercury erupted into a burst of metal and boiling oil. The 50 cal didn't just disable it, it erased it. The Go-Fast shifted from crawling forward to a corpse on the ocean. No thrust, no maneuvering, no escape options. On deck, the smugglers were now calculating a grim equation: federal time or a desperate 200-meter swim. Above them, the helicopter held overwatch, while the Kimball sent in the greeting party. 2 7-meter RIBs smashed into the water, each carrying 6 operators from a tactical maritime unit. Not patrol officers, specialized maritime interdiction teams, trained for violent boardings in seas just like this. The RIBs pushed in a flawless pincer, their 470 horsepower diesel screaming as they tore through the chomp at 45 knots. Each craft carried a full law enforcement element. South SWAT operators in level 4 armor with flotation, M4A1 carbines with EOTechs, and enough less lethal options for whatever surprise waited aboard. The lead boat would make contact, the second swept wide to lock down firing lanes. The first boat closed on the Go-Fast's quarter at a shallow angle, the coxswain holding perfect spacing while wrestling the swell. At 10 meters, the bowman rose. A Beretta M9 came up level. On paper, a 9mm is modest. Up close, pointed at your face, it speaks louder than any translation guide. Commands ripped out in sharp, clipped Spanish. cutting through wind and idling motors. Hands up. Don't move. Kneel. 5 men froze beside tarps hiding their cargo. The second RIB slid into view along starboard. 6 more rifles, 6 more operators, 12 muzzles now aimed at 5 men who instantly regretted every bad decision that led here. The smugglers edged forward, hands high, palms on their chests. But these 5 weren't the biggest problem on scene. Their vessel, essentially a stateless craft under maritime law, was headed for a Viking funeral. The disposal crew soaked the deck and hull with accelerant, probably the same fuel feeding the RIBs. Then, with all the ceremony of lighting a campfire, an operator flicked a flare aboard. The moment it touched wood, the Go-Fast became the most expensive bonfire in that ocean sector. They watched it burn for hours. Only after it finally sank beneath the waves did the teams move the detainees and seized load back toward the nearest U.S. port for processing. Thanks for watching this video.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And we were talking about insane marksmen. I'll attach the link. Thanks for listening.